Case number 10, Zira Colburn. In 1804, a boy was born in Cabot, Vermont, who could perform calculations that would take grown mathematicians hours. By age 6, Zira Colburn was multiplying six-digit numbers in his head faster than his audience could write them down. His father, a farmer with no formal education himself, quickly recognized the commercial potential and began touring the child across America and Europe. The claim surrounding Zira is not merely that he was gifted, but that he represented something the academic establishment could not explain and therefore chose to ignore. In 1812, the boy stood before the Royal Society in London and correctly computed the 16th root of a 39-digit number in a matter of seconds. He was 8 years old. Mathematicians present admitted they could not replicate his process, yet no serious scientific study was ever conducted. The evidence for his abilities is overwhelming. Contemporary accounts from credible witnesses, including Washington Irving, document performances that seem to defy cognitive limits. Zira himself, in his 1833 memoir, described his methods as intuitive, claiming the answers simply appeared to him without conscious effort. Skeptics argue that Zira was employing memorized shortcuts and that his abilities, while impressive, were not supernatural. His eventual career as an unremarkable Methodist minister seems to support this more mundane interpretation, but here is where the conspiracy begins. After his childhood fame, Zira Colburn essentially vanished from scholarly discourse. No institution offered to study his methods. No university sought to understand his cognition. He was paraded, monetized, and then abandoned when he ceased to be profitable. He died in 1839 at 35, poor and largely forgotten. Perhaps there was nothing to suppress. Or perhaps a boy who could outperform the finest minds simply embarrassed the wrong people. Either way, history moved on without him. Case number 9, William James Sidis. By any conventional measure, William James Sidis may have been the most intelligent human being who ever lived. Born in New York City in 1898 to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants who were themselves intellectuals, William was reading the New York Times at 18 months. At 6, he had mastered 8 languages. At 11, he delivered a lecture on four-dimensional bodies to the Harvard Mathematical Club, becoming the youngest person ever to enroll at that institution. The claim is straightforward. Here was a mind of potentially unlimited capability, and American society systematically destroyed him. The documented evidence is voluminous. Newspaper articles from 1909 and 1910 breathlessly covered the Harvard prodigy. His IQ was estimated between 250 and 300, though such figures are disputed. His academic work in mathematics and his theoretical writings on cosmology showed genuine innovation, not mere recitation. The skeptical position holds that Sidis was simply burnt out, pushed relentlessly by his psychologist father, Boris, who believed genius could be manufactured through early intervention. William rebelled against intellectual pursuit entirely. He spent his adult years collecting streetcar transfers and working menial jobs, dying of a brain hemorrhage in 1944 at 46. But the conspiracy theory runs deeper. In 1937, The New Yorker published a cruel profile mocking his obscure life, invading his privacy so thoroughly that he sued the magazine. The article was not journalism. It was a public execution of a man who had committed the crime of failing to live up to impossible expectations. Some researchers argue the constant media harassment was itself a form of social control, a warning to other prodigies about the cost of standing too far outside the norm. William Sidis did not disappear from history. He was hunted out of it, and the institutions that created him never once asked if they were the ones who should answer for his fate. Case number 8, Marie Winteler. In the winter of 1895, a 16-year-old student arrived in the small Swiss town of Aarau. His name was Albert Einstein, and he was boarding with the family of Jost Winteler, a teacher at the local school. Within weeks, the young Einstein had fallen deeply in love with the Winteler daughter, Marie, who was 18 and by all accounts his intellectual equal. The claim surrounding Marie Winteler is one of deliberate historical minimization. Here was a young woman who engaged Einstein in substantive discussions about physics and philosophy during the very period his revolutionary ideas were forming, yet she appears in biographies as little more than a youthful romance, dismissed and forgotten. The evidence of her influence is circumstantial but compelling. Einstein's letters from this period show a mind being sharpened through debate and discussion. He described Marie as brilliant, yet when he departed for Zurich and eventually married Mileva Maric, Marie was erased from the intellectual narrative entirely. Skeptics rightly point out that we have no surviving writings from Marie herself. Without documentary evidence of her contributions, any claim about her influence remains speculation. She eventually married and lived a quiet life, giving us little to evaluate. But the conspiracy angle asks an uncomfortable question. How many women like Marie Winteler contributed to the development of ideas credited solely to the men around them? The Winteler family letters were held privately for decades. When they finally became available, scholars showed remarkably little interest in reconstructing Marie's intellectual life. Perhaps she was simply a teenage girlfriend, nothing more. But perhaps, like so many women of her era, she was quietly removed from a story that required only one protagonist. We will likely never know what she might have become if anyone had thought to ask. Case number 7. Joseph Mengelé's twin subjects. Between 1943 and 1945, the physician Joseph Mengele conducted horrific experiments on twins at Auschwitz, seeking to unlock the secrets of multiple births for the Nazi eugenics program. Among his subjects were several children who displayed exceptional cognitive abilities, prodigies who had been identified and selected specifically because their gifts made them scientifically interesting. The claim here is not about conspiracy in the traditional sense. It is about systematic erasure through atrocity. Children whose names we will never know, whose potential we cannot measure, who were tortured and murdered and then forgotten because their deaths served no narrative purpose after the war. The documented evidence comes primarily from survivor testimonies and the incomplete camp records that survived. Eva Moses Kor, who endured Mengelé's experiments alongside her twin sister Miriam, has spoken extensively about children in the twin barracks who demonstrated unusual abilities, memories, and intellectual capacities. These children were of particular interest to Mengele, and few survived. There is no skeptical counter-argument to offer here. The crimes are documented fact. What warrants examination is what happened to the records. When Mengele fled to South America, he took extensive documentation with him. Those records have never been recovered. Decades of searching have produced nothing. Some intelligence researchers believe the documentation was acquired by other parties interested in the research itself, though this remains unproven. The child prodigies who died at Auschwitz were not removed from history by neglect. They were murdered, and then their murders were buried under the weight of millions of other deaths. They have no individual memorials. Most have no names. I include them here because forgetting them would be its own crime, and history, left unexamined, commits crimes of its own. Case Measure 6, Christian Heinrich Heineken. He was known as the Infant of Lübeck, and if contemporary accounts are accurate, he remains one of the most extraordinary minds ever recorded. Christian Heinrich Heineken was born in Germany in February 1721. By age 1, he knew the major events of the Bible. By 2, he had mastered Latin and French. By 3, he was conversant in world history, geography, and anatomy. He died at 4 years and 4 months, reportedly predicting his own death. The claim surrounding Heineken is twofold. First, that his abilities exceeded what should be physiologically possible in a brain so young. Second, that after his death, serious inquiry into his case was actively discouraged by religious authorities who considered him either a divine miracle or a demonic aberration. The evidence comes from extensive documentation by his tutor, Christian von Schoeneich, who kept detailed records of the child's development. These records were published in 1726 and were widely circulated among European intellectuals. Voltaire himself referenced the case. Skeptics argue reasonably that the accounts are exaggerated. Von Schoeneich had financial incentive to sensationalize his pupil's abilities. No independent verification exists. The child's early death prevented any adult assessment of whether his abilities would have persisted. But the conspiracy angle emerges in what happened to the scholarly interest. After Heineken's death, the Lutheran Church in Lübeck took possession of the remaining documentation. Requests by researchers in the 19th century to examine the original materials were repeatedly denied. By the 20th century, much of the primary source material had simply vanished. Perhaps nothing was deliberately hidden. Documents are lost to time constantly, but a child who challenged what we understood about human cognition deserved better than obscurity. Christian Heineken was forgotten because remembering him would require explaining him, and no one could. Case Fringer 5. Arfa Karim Randhawa. On February 2, 2004, a 9-year-old girl from Faisalabad, Pakistan, became the youngest Microsoft certified professional in the world. Her name was Arfa Karim Randhawa, and her achievement was so remarkable that Bill Gates personally invited her to Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington. She was celebrated internationally, received Pakistan's highest civilian honors, and was positioned to become one of the most important technologists of her generation. She died of cardiac arrest on January 14, 2012. She was 16 years old. The claim surrounding Arfa Karim is not that she was suppressed, but that her death was followed by a curious silence. The technology industry, which had made her a symbol of possibility in the developing world, moved on with remarkable speed. Within 2 years, she was largely forgotten outside Pakistan. The evidence of her abilities is beyond dispute. She was certified in Microsoft technologies that adult professionals struggle to master. She spoke at international conferences on technology education. Her understanding of software architecture at age 10 exceeded that of many working programmers. Skeptics would say there is no conspiracy here, merely the normal fading of celebrity. Child stars burn brightly and are quickly replaced. Her death, while tragic, was medically explained as resulting from complications after a cardiac event. But the conspiracy theory asks why the global technology industry has done so little to memorialize her. Pakistan named a technology park after her, but the international tech community, which had used her face to promote global digital inclusion, has let her name slip into obscurity. No major foundation bears her name. No significant scholarship program commemorates her. Perhaps this is simply how the world works. Or perhaps a girl from rural Pakistan was a useful symbol when alive and an inconvenient reminder of broken promises when dead, I report. You decide what to remember. Case number 4. Branwell Bront. You know the Bronte sisters. Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre. Emily wrote Wuthering Heights. Anne wrote The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Together, they transformed English literature. But there was a fourth creative genius in that parsonage in Yorkshire, and his name was Branwell. Patrick Branwell Bronte was born in 1817, the only son among 4 surviving siblings. As a child, he was considered the family prodigy. His paintings showed genuine talent. His poetry was sophisticated beyond his years. His father, a clergyman of modest means, focused the family's limited resources on advancing Branwell's career, believing he would be the one to achieve greatness. The claim is this: Branwell Bronte contributed significantly to his sister's literary work, and after his death, those contributions were systematically erased to preserve the more marketable narrative of 3 solitary female geniuses. The evidence is fragmentary but suggestive. The Bronte children collaborated extensively on elaborate imaginary worlds, writing thousands of pages together. Branwell's handwriting appears in early manuscripts. His understanding of the Yorkshire landscape, the military details, and certain male psychological perspectives in the novels suggests more than casual influence. Skeptics point to Branwell's well-documented decline into alcoholism and opium addiction. He died in 1848 at 31, his potential utterly squandered. His surviving paintings and poems, while competent, show nothing approaching his sister's achievements. Perhaps he was simply the family disappointment, elevated by nostalgia. But the conspiracy theory notes that Charlotte Bronte, who outlived her siblings, carefully controlled the family narrative. She edited letters, destroyed documents, and shaped how the family would be remembered. Branwell Bronte may have been a failed drunk, or he may have been a genuine prodigy whose contributions were buried to create a cleaner story. History, as always, was written by the survivor. Case number 3, John Stuart Mill. In 1806, the philosopher James Mill began an experiment in education that would later be described as either brilliant or abusive, depending on who was judging. His subject was his firstborn son, John Stuart. By age 3, John Stuart Mill was learning Greek. By 8, he had read Herodotus, Xenophon, and Plato in the original. By 12, he was studying Aristotelian logic and advanced mathematics. By 14, he had completed an education equivalent to a university degree. He never attended school with other children. He had no childhood in any recognizable sense. The claim surrounding John Stuart Mill is not that he was removed from history. On the contrary, he became one of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century. The claim is that what was done to him was never adequately examined, and that the method his father employed was quietly suppressed to protect the reputations of those who advocated it. The evidence of harm is in Mill's own words. In his autobiography, published after his death in 1873, he described a mental crisis at age 20 that left him suicidal and emotionally hollow. He attributed his recovery to poetry and feeling, everything his education had denied him. Skeptics argue that Mill ultimately thrived. He wrote on liberty, he championed women's rights, he served in Parliament. His education, however extreme, produced results. But the conspiracy angle asks why James Mill's methods were not more thoroughly discredited. Other children were subjected to similar experiments throughout the 19th century. Some died, some went mad. Yet the model persisted because it occasionally produced a John Stuart Mill, and the failures were quietly buried. John Stuart Mill survived his childhood, but he was clear about what it cost him. The fact that we still debate whether his education was worth it tells us something uncomfortable about how we value children versus how we value achievements. Case number 2, Barbara Newhall Follett. In 1927, a 12-year-old girl from New Haven, Connecticut, published a novel called The House Without Windows. Critics compared her to Emily Dickinson and Virginia Woolf. The book sold remarkably well. A second novel followed. Barbara Newhall Follett was declared the most gifted child author in American history, and her future seemed limitless. On December 7, 1939, she left her apartment in Brookline, Massachusetts with $30 in her purse. She was never seen again. The claim surrounding Barbara Follett is that her disappearance was not merely a personal tragedy, but the final act of a systematic failure by every institution that had exploited her. The documented evidence of her talent is extensive. Her childhood letters show a command of language that professional writers envy. Her novels, written before she was a teenager, demonstrate genuine literary sophistication. Her father, the writer Wilson Follett, promoted her relentlessly to publishers and critics. Then Wilson Follett abandoned his family for another woman. The income stopped. Barbara's mother, Helen, struggled to survive. Barbara herself, robbed of support, married young and badly. Her husband was unfaithful. Her writing career collapsed. She worked as a secretary. Skeptics say that Barbara Follett simply chose to disappear. Her unhappy marriage, her failed career, her estranged father. These are reasons enough. No conspiracy required. But the deeper question haunts me. Here was a child of extraordinary gifts. Publishers made money from her. Critics built careers reviewing her. And when she needed help, when her world collapsed, where were they? Barbara Newhall Follett was exploited when useful and abandoned when not. Her case remains technically open. No body was ever found. She would be 119 years old today. I do not know if she was murdered, if she committed suicide, or if she simply walked away from a world that had taken everything and given nothing back. But I know this. She deserved better than to become a mystery. She deserved to become the writer she was meant to be. Case number 1, Blaise Pascal. On June 19, 1623, a child was born in Clermont-Ferrand, France, who would challenge everything we believe about the limits of the human mind. His name was Blaise Pascal, and before his 19th birthday, he had independently recreated Euclidean geometry, invented a mechanical calculator, and conducted experiments that would help establish the modern scientific method. The claim surrounding Pascal is the most troubling of all. Here was perhaps the greatest child prodigy in recorded history, and the institutions of his time actively worked to limit what he could accomplish. The evidence begins with his father, Etienne Pascal, a mathematician and tax official who initially forbade the young Blaise from studying mathematics, fearing it would interfere with his other studies. When Etienne discovered that his 12-year-old son had independently worked out the first 23 propositions of Euclid without any instruction, he relented. But the damage was already done. Blaise had learned that his gifts were something to be hidden, not celebrated. The physical evidence of his accomplishments is overwhelming. The Pascaline, his mechanical calculator, survives in museum collections. His experiments on atmospheric pressure, conducted in his 20s, are foundational to physics. His philosophical work, the Pensée, remains in print nearly 4 centuries later. Skeptics would point out that Pascal was celebrated in his lifetime. He corresponded with Descartes and Fermat. He was famous throughout Europe. Where is the suppression? The suppression was medical. Pascal suffered from chronic illness his entire life, likely a condition affecting his nervous system. Rather than accommodating his genius, the scientific establishment of his time demanded he work at their pace, attend their academies, engage in their politics. He could not. He retreated into religious contemplation and died at 39, his greatest work unfinished. But here is the conspiracy that no one speaks of. The church, which Pascal devoted his final years to defending, systematically edited and rearranged the Pensée after his death. The work we read today is not the work he intended to publish. Pages were rearranged, passages were suppressed. His sister Gilberte controlled the narrative. We do not know what Blaise Pascal actually believed in his final years, because those who claimed to love him decided we should not know. The greatest child prodigy of the 17th century was not removed from history. He was revised. He was edited. He was shaped into something acceptable. And that, perhaps, is the most insidious removal of all. Not disappearance, but distortion. Not forgetting, but rewriting. The cases I have presented tonight span centuries and continents. Some of these children were exploited. Some were abandoned. Some were murdered. Some simply faded away when they were no longer convenient or profitable. But all of them share one thing. They challenge what we believe humans are capable of, and the world could not tolerate that challenge. I do not know if there is a grand conspiracy against exceptional children. I suspect the truth is simpler and sadder. We use these children when they serve us, and when they no longer do, we move on. History is not written by the victors. History is written by those who survive long enough to hold the pen. These children did not survive, and so their stories, like so much else, were written by others. I am Detective Nash, and this case, like all the others, remains open.